soccer, basketball, skiing, and tennis. On the cultural level, we went to concerts, operas, lectures, debates, and chess tournaments. Life began to take a certain normalcy, and we started to get used to the new order until June 22. A year earlier, Germany had signed a non-aggression pact with Russia, but on June 21, 1941, the German army attacked the Russian frontier. At first, everyone thought that the Red Army would crush the Germans, but after invading Lithuania, in a few days, the Soviet army retreated and continued to retreat farther into their motherland. At the time, many Jews were also fleeing to Russia, but very few were let in. Some of them were Russian soldiers defending the western border. But even they, when they tried to retreat with their army, were told to fight and hold back the Nazi assault. I was 15 and my brother was 11 and a half years old. We knew the Nazis were antagonistic to the Jewish people even more than the Russians were. When the Germans came and occupied Lithuania, they made many decrees placing severe restrictions against the Jewish population and taking most of the basic privileges away. In the first week after the invasion, Lithuanian collaborators began rounding up Jews on the streets and taking them to be executed outside our towns in Ninth Fort, which was an armament depot from World War I. A few days after Germans entered town, I was walking on the street near our house when suddenly I was approached by 4 Lithuanian collaborators with shotguns, who asked me what I was doing on the street. Fortunately, my Lithuanian was perfect. I said I was going to visit a friend, and they said, "You'd better watch out. There are Jews shooting at Lithuanians and German soldiers from the windows." I knew it was a lie because the Jews didn't have any guns. I would have hesitated. They would have taken me because I was having taken me. Most Jews in Lithuania tended to speak Yiddish and Russian, and because my Lithuanian was flawless, the nationalists took me for a Christian, and that saved my life. Lots of Jews disappeared in the coming week, and their homes were ransacked and confiscated. We began to hear rumors about atrocities toward the Jews, but people were hoping that they were just rumors. Then in August, following the June invasion, the Germans announced that all the Jews in Kaunas, which is Kovno, had to move into a ghetto about 10 miles outside the town. They had to move there on foot. We had to move there on foot, carrying bags and boxes with our belongings on our backs or in baby carriages. Things were utter confusion and nobody knew what to expect. Once we moved to the ghetto, which with as many of our belongings as possible, all the inhabitants of the ghetto were ordered to gather in a large field. While we were standing there, the Germans read the rules and regulations that we were required to obey. There was a small hospital in the ghetto when we arrived. While we were standing there in the field, the SS burned the whole hospital with everybody in it, doctors, nurses, and patients. I remember seeing the flames. We thought they had evacuated everyone, but we found out afterwards that everyone inside was burned alive, in total 80 people. The killings continued. In October, everyone in the ghetto was ordered to gather on a large field. Older people who could not walk were separated from us to be taken to a resort area. My grandparents, 2 uncles, and their families were in that group. We never saw them again. They were taken to a military fort about 10 miles from the ghetto and shot. Ultimately, over 80,000 Jews were shot at that fort in Kaunas. My father, mother, and younger brother, and I were left behind to work with the remainder of the ghetto population, which was divided into groups and worked under the strict supervision of German army guards on construction of the airport, munitions factories, and fortifications. During that time, many people disappeared. Periodically, Nazi soldiers and the Ukrainian SS would come and raid the ghetto, dragging people and taking them to be shot. Babies and young children were often hidden under beds by their mothers. The children were found to be picked up with a long stick with a rounded end by the little neck, dumped on a truck, and then murdered. I knew there was an underground working out of the ghetto with contacts in the forest. I became involved with some young people who had contacts with the underground. The following year, in 1942, I was smuggled out of the ghetto through a hidden hole in the fence. With my friends, I looked up at some of the people who had escaped from the ghetto previously and contacted Russian soldiers who had not been taken prisoner and who were the nucleus of the underground in the Lithuanian forest. The Russians had their own guns. They told us if we wanted guns, we had to capture Nazi soldiers and take their guns away from them. I spent 2 years working with the underground in various sabotage and derailing supply trains, blowing up bridges, and gathering intelligence as I spoke perfect German, Russian, and Lithuanian, which was transmitted to the Soviet army. During this 2-year period, I returned to the ghetto several times to visit my family, a mission in itself was very dangerous. My brother was only 12 and a half, too young to join the underground. In January of 1944, at the age of 17, I was involved in a mission to blow up a Nazi ammunition and supply train that was on the way to the front lines. There were 7 of us. We got there very early. It was still dark, snowing. We laid our dynamite on the ground and on the tracks and didn't have to camouflage it as it was snowing. The first explosion was the locomotive, but it kept moving and dragging the rest of the cars as they exploded like a chain reaction. We were successful in destroying the train, but there were 5 German soldiers in the last car who jumped off and started shooting at us. We had a shootout with them, and only 1 soldier survived, but all 6 of my comrades were killed, or at least they were wounded. I was wounded and lying on the ground, face up, with my eyes half closed, in great pain. My rifle 3 feet away from me, but I had my revolver in my hand under my coat. A German soldier who survived poked and stabbed everybody in the throat with his bayonet to make sure they were dead. When he came to me and was going to stab me, I shot him point blank with my revolver. All 6 of my comrades were dead. For 3 hours, I crawled back to the underground camp, losing a lot of blood. When I finally got to our camp, I fainted. The medic, a 30-year-old medical student, couldn't do much for me because I had been shot 5 times. 1 bullet missed my heart by 2 inches, and 2 bullets lodged inside me. I badly needed a blood transfusion, so it was decided to smuggle me back into the ghetto makeshift hospital. Doctors there gave me blood from one of my ghetto friends and got the bullets out without an anesthetic. 4 months later, the evacuation of the ghetto began. It was the summer of 1944 when the SS started entering the ghetto. Some Jews hid in bunkers they had built under the living quarters. I and 8 of my friends stayed in one of those underground bunkers for 6 days and nights. We had an oxygen tank for daytime, but at night we used to come out for fresh air, water, and food that was left in some of the abandoned ghetto houses. On the 7th day, we thought that we finally made it, but by midday, dogs came and we heard the soldiers yelling, "Arouse, get out." They made us climb out, then had us kneel in a row and put our hands behind our heads. We felt sure this was it, that they were going to shoot us on the spot. After they searched us for weapons, they escorted us to the place from which the ghetto residents were to be shipped off to concentration camps for hard labor to help fortify the German retreat. I looked at one of the guards. He was not a member of the SS, but a regular soldier. I asked him how they found us. He said that the SS had taken away babies from their mothers and promised that no harm would come to them if they would tell where Jews were hiding. It was a cruel trick because the SS lied to them and never returned the babies to the mothers. The Jews were shipped to a settlement camp in Stutthof, Germany. My father and I were separated from my mother and little brother. We finally arrived in Dachau. There were 10 camps in Dachau complex and we moved from one camp to another. Life in these camps was far worse than the ghetto. We slept in makeshift long underground huts covered with grass. There were 100 sleeping spaces, 50 on either side. Most morning when I woke up, there were dead people on both sides of me. Nutrition was very poor, the labor was hard, and once you got the runs, you never recuperated until breakfast lasted no more than 2 or 3 days. My father and